Uh, Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everybody to the first webinar in our series of showcasing portfolios at UNC Charlotte. Today we have two faculty members from Public Health Sciences. I'm Sam Anneman in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and I will be your host for this session. Some housekeeping before we get started. If you have any sound problems, click on the audio button in your interface there and run the audio test again. If you need to leave temporarily, if you'll click on the emoticons, that yellow smiley face below the list of attendees, and you'll see a coffee cup button, and that's the button we use to let us know that you've left temporarily. And if you have any other technical issues, the best thing to do is to call WebEx support. That number is 1-866-229-3239. And before I go any further, I'd like to invite everybody, if you would, to please, in the chat, make sure that your chat is set to send to all participants, first of all, and then type into the chat the department you're in and where you're logging on from today. So if everyone would do that, type into chat, that would be great. And so finally, just a few guidelines. When you want to ask questions, if you would just click on the hand raise icon, that will let us know, and then you'll be invited to speak. But at any time, and even if you don't have, especially if you don't have a microphone, you can type any comments and questions that you have directly into the chat. I will be monitoring the chat, and we will answer all the questions as they come up. And finally, we are recording today's session, and I will be sending out a link to that by the end of the week. So I will just do a very quick introduction of our presenters, and they can certainly tell you more about themselves if they would like. Andrew Harver is a professor of public health sciences in the College of Health and Human Services. For more than 20 years, he's been an advocate for writing to learn and incorporates substantive writing activities in all his courses at both undergraduate and graduate levels. Crystal Piper is an associate professor of public health sciences here at UNC Charlotte. In an attempt to better explain the multiple determinants associated with a specific condition, her research agenda integrates a life course approach to the study of chronic diseases and contributes to the advancement of her expertise in the field. So please, everyone, I believe we're going to welcome Andrew first. So please welcome Andrew.
All right, thanks, Sam. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for finding time to join us today live, and welcome those of you who may have time and interest to be in the playback mode. So we're going to share with you today our use of e-portfolios in the Department of Public Health Sciences. We got started a couple, 3 years ago on this initiative thanks to the leadership of John Smale in the University College, who invited a few departments to join in an initiative that started a couple years ago. And so although we've been engaged in this for 3 or 4 years now, we're still ourselves on a learning curve. And we're happy to share where we are at this point of time with the use of e-portfolios in the department. So I'm with Crystal Piper. I think I'm going to do most of the blabbing for now, but hopefully we'll have some time for follow-up as we move through the slide deck that we've prepared to provide you an overview of why we're using portfolios, how we're using e-portfolios, and then some examples of what our e-portfolios look like. We're going to spend a disproportionate amount of time about why we're using e-portfolios, because portfolios can be used for multiple purposes and multiple audiences. and it's important, I think, to frame any interest in this digital pedagogy around a philosophy or a framework of usage. So our primary point of departure turns from the LEAP initiative sponsored by the American Association of Colleges and University, which has argued for about the last 10 to 12 years that the undergraduate experience has become too fragmented to prepare students for today's world. And so, according to some so-called thought leaders in higher education, and you'll see their names mentioned at the bottom of this slide, Randy Bass from Georgetown University and Brett Enyon from LaGuardia Community College have been out in front both as individuals and institutions addressing this tension between integrated learning experiences and the typical disintegration of the undergraduate educational experience. And they've argued that you can, there's sort of two views in the world. One that focuses on discrete granular learning experiences, learning decoupled from competency-based learning, analytics that track narrow or small, narrow learning outcomes, versus a more integrated, coherent approach to higher education where both curricular and co-curricular experiences are relevant to student learning, where there is fundamental importance at demonstrating connections and integration of learning experiences and addressing the larger whole person. When I think about the fragmentation of higher education that people have referred to over the years, I think about this wonderful parable that we're all familiar with about the elephant and the blind man. And so I think sometimes when we ask students to describe or characterize what they have gotten from their major, what they have gotten from their educational experiences, it depends on where they are standing and what they have experienced and what they have prioritized. And so the need is to provide approaches and methodologies to foster and facilitate more integrated learning experiences, and ultimately ePortfolios is one of those mechanisms. It's not the only one, but it is one that has developed quickly around the country, actually around the world. So we know this approach to higher education. We've been doing the same thing for about 600 years. And if you notice the fellow down here in the corner falling asleep, we experience that every day in our classroom. And so this model of delivering knowledge passively to students is one that has permeated our approach to higher education for, well, centuries, and it's about time that we develop different approaches to meeting 21st century needs. And those approaches are evident in a lot of different ways. So even here on campus, similar to many other institutions, we have developed an active learning academy which promotes active learning techniques in the classroom, which are in contrast, right, to this long-standing tradition of delivering information from the podium. And this active learning initiative addresses this same tension, I think, between the disintegration and integration of student achievement, student experience, student learning. And we're seeing that occur even at the secondary education level. Some of you may be familiar with the XQ project, which resonates in a very similar kind of way with a more holistic, authentic, student-centered approach to mastering fundamentals and integrating educational experiences. So to sort of, again, sort of set this stage, a lot of individuals around the country recognize that engagement, reflection, integration are key 21st century characteristics for student learning, for lifetime of success, and for addressing this fragmentation of student experiences, so evident in higher education today. So one of the things that we're benefiting from these days, of course, is technology. And there are a number of opportunities that technology affords, of course, to address many of these issues. And one of these digital learning technologies, of course, is the e-portfolio. So the question that in part drives some of the activities in the Department of Public Health Sciences is how do we integrate learning experiences for students, and how do we increasingly document evidence for these integrated learning experiences? In other words, we need a 21st century approach to a 21st century challenge. So what is an e-portfolio? Here are a couple of definitions. One from Reese and Levy that simply shares that it's a collection of artifacts and resources and accomplishments that represent some history of achievement in an individual, maybe a group, perhaps an institution. And the definition by Kathleen Yancey is kind of a classic one, where the focus on the development of these e-portfolios is the collection, selection, and reflection of student works that indicate certain authentic learning experiences among our students. So e-portfolios turn out to be uniquely learner-centered, and they emphasize these processes of collection, selection, and reflection. Buzzwords around the development and implementation of these e-portfolios include learner agency, reflection, the development of a digital identity, a focus on student-centered learning and assessment, and processes related to metacognition, where students must make a judgment about the relevance and importance of their experiences in an integrated way. So e-portfolios then cut across a number of systems. They are learner-centered. They can be integrated with other social pedagogies. They focus on integration, and they can promote institutional learning. So our focus to date has mostly been on the learner-centered dimension of the e-portfolios, but other purposes of this mechanism include assessment issues, both for the individual, for programs, and for institutions, and for employability, so that e-portfolios are often seen as also having an outward face for different audiences to make judgments about students' capabilities, accomplishments, and preparedness for the workforce. We're not exactly there, but we do want to focus on some of our learner-centered activities. So it turns out to be important for collecting and student reflection to document these integrated learning processes, and also addresses another element of the LEAP challenge that I referred to earlier, which are these high impact practices. AAC&U has recognized, again, this fragmented, disjointed approach to higher education, and one way to pull back students into a more authentic, student-centered goal is to consider these 10 high-impact practices that were developed in 2008 by the former founder of NESE. And these are not unfamiliar activities that we like to see students engage in order to promote their development. So these high-impact practices came out in 2008 in a volume published by AAC&U by George Koo. And I mention this because some of us, are familiar with these high-impact practices and their value for students and their effect on helping build substantive relationships with faculty, helping students engage across the curriculum, helping students apply what they learn, and providing opportunities for student growth. I mention all this because just this past summer, e-portfolios now have been declared by George Koo as the 11th high impact practice. And so there is, again, evidence from around the country enough to persuade George Koo that e-portfolios provide another mechanism for engaging students in authentic learning experiences that ultimately make a difference. And what is of relevance to me in particular is e-portfolios, unlike some of these other high-impact activities, learning communities, undergraduate research, can be scaled in a manner that is not possible with some of the other HIPs. Okay, so we think that this practice promotes students' integrative authorship, is an opportunity to have bridges between activities and courses from across semesters, enables connections with faculty, and is one approach to fostering and facilitating these integrative experiences. So let me share for just a couple minutes then what we've been trying to do. Our focus has been on, again, student learning in our Bachelor of Science Public Health program. It's a pretty select program of about 100 students. We admit around 45 to 50 students each year. And our program is also accredited by a national agency, CEF, the Council on Education for Public Health. So we have some built-in structure for our e-portfolio initiative, which is our accreditation competencies, goals, learning goals that we expect students to meet as they participate in the curriculum in our upper division 2-year major. So we have already articulated some learning goals that we expect students to meet, and we try to thread those learning goals through the curriculum and increasingly try to provide evidence for student success meeting those goals through the e-portfolio process. So we started a couple years looking at our assignments and how those assignments lined up with our student learning outcomes. And many of you know how difficult it is to build assignments that are highly relevant and are scaffolded so that we're bringing students along in a direction that's consistent with the larger expectations of the program. And somebody needs to spend a couple of webinars characterizing how challenging it is and how time-consuming it is to build assignments that lead to the student outcomes that we all promote. So here's a concept map of our Bachelor of Science in Public Health program that our students prepared. In public health, there are 5 core areas outlined here in light blue, and students are able to demonstrate that the courses that they take are aligned with those core areas of public health, and the groups that do an especially good job reflecting on their participation in the program are able to identify on the outer ring here individual aspects of their coursework that are important to them and relevant in the development of their competencies as public health students. So students understand the nature of the program, and our goal then is to capture some of that activity in a more individualistic, cohesive way through the e-portfolio. So you see the 5 core areas of public health on the outer ring on this slide, and our program also promotes 4 what we call cross-cutting competencies: frameworks of public health, communication in public health, diversity and culture, and professionalism. So to date, it's not the only way to do it, but to date we use that structure to facilitate the student development of the e-portfolio activity. So students need to understand what those competencies are, and increasingly they need to document their success at mastering those competencies through the collection of artifacts across the curriculum, the selection of artifacts that relate to these individual competencies, and then ultimately personal reflection on how their curricular and co-curricular activities provide evidence for their success at meeting those expectations. So the last thing we've done, and this is kind of where we are now, is to map our competencies here on the left throughout the curriculum on the top, the individual courses, and to begin to identify signature assignments in each of these courses that relate to these competencies and emphasize and encourage students to collect evidence, artifacts of those competencies through their coursework and through other high-impact practices and through other co-curricular activities so that they're able to assemble in a systematic way their successes with the program. So here's what a couple of these look like. So this is just the first page of a 2- or 3-page Mahara website where students now begin to assemble and articulate their interpretation of these competencies. Danielle here shows professionalism, frameworks, and communication. They provide us with a reflection on what those competencies are about, and then they begin to demonstrate through the uploading of papers and presentations and videos and other examples of their work that align with and are consistent with demonstrating their understanding of and success with these particular competencies. So here's another example from Ashley, where again you see 3 of these competencies. The 4th one is down below on the screen, and what she has decided to focus on, for example, for her professionalism area is her LinkedIn page, a report on careers in public health, and then there would be some other artifacts down below as well. Lucille shows us her frameworks and diversity and culture competencies. And again, students are required to select in a systematic, thoughtful kind of way what activities they've participated in over the course of the curriculum that demonstrate their success with their understanding of what their preparedness is for these competencies. And then one more from Karen. And what you begin to see here is all 4 areas: the frameworks, diversity and culture, professionalism, and communication, and the various artifacts that she has selected that demonstrate her success achieving those goals. Students also create a final reflection that is more integrative in nature, which integrates the various aspects of their e-portfolio. So here's a word cloud from the final reflections of about a dozen students last year. So obviously they're extracting that e-portfolios contribute to their BSPH program professional skills and future. Our competencies are evident in the word cloud and in their conversations about the meaningfulness of their work across the program, to include communication, culture, professionalism, and where's diversity? Oh, it might be too small, but it's in here somewhere, okay? So students are doing a pretty good job, I think, extracting for us the representation of our expectations for the program in their work. Finally, there is a disconnect, right, between what employers think are important and what students think they are prepared to contribute to the workforce. This is from a survey of over 400 employers from 2015, where employers, for example, expect students to be prepared to work with others and students think they are ready for that, but employers do not. So we've begun to think seriously about those fundamental soft skills that are valued in the workplace: communication, teamwork, problem solving, critical thinking, and trying to find those, find that evidence in the work of students in their e-portfolios. They can be more sophisticated to include certificates, publications, resumes, these kinds of things. And increasingly, and this outward face of these e-portfolios, which we're beginning to address, employers find that e-portfolios could be of value in evaluating candidates, so that students provide that tangible evidence of their experience and success, not only with degree program expectations, but with expectations of what is valued in the workplace. And then it can get more complicated than that in our digital world, but there are some real opportunities for an enlarged picture of this digital technology. So that's where we are at today, and Sam is giving me a wave. So I'm glad to have gotten through this content, a good amount of material. Crystal and I and others in the department are more than happy to follow up with anyone on any item or issue. And those of you who may play this back in the future are especially welcome to join the initiative.
Are there any questions or comments that people have? We're happy to take those. And you can either use your microphone or type them into chat. Well, okay, so I'd like to thank Andrew and Crystal. We met just very briefly. And before we actually end this, I'd just like to offer you, since we're in the middle of the day here, I can't offer you lunch, but I can at least offer you some virtual desserts. So maybe in the, okay, so Joseph asked the question, how do you relate to the students what you expect of them? Do you give them examples?
Yes. Many years ago, when I would be working with paper and pencil versions of portfolios, Deb Bosley challenged me and said, how do you expect students to build a bridge if they've never built a bridge? And so I tried not to provide examples in the beginning, but I think it's very important for students to understand what the expectations are for the portfolio. One thing I've begun to do just this past year is students present their portfolios to their peers in the classroom. And so students begin to see the range of possibilities, and that greatly influences their development of their success with the activity.
I also want to add, good afternoon, everyone. In one of the courses in the BSPH program, I do offer a sample hard copy portfolio, and I encourage the students to speak with other students in the cohort, because ideally the students connect their learning across the field and integrate with the artifacts and activities, as Andrew has mentioned. And so in my course, it's really community driven. They have 12 activities that have to be done out in the community, and so I do give them sample ideas of the expectations. And since they are actively engaged in the community, they get the opportunity to reflect and experience and integrate those activities across the entire 2-year curriculum. So once they reach Andrew's course, that portfolio has grown tremendously, as many of those students in the sample presentations that he provided started in my course with a very basic understanding of how to use Mahara and what ePortfolio is and why they're even doing it. And then it grows. We all see them grow over the 2-year period. So they do get some basic in that first course idea of the expectations.
Excellent. We're happy to entertain any other questions if there are any. So now that everyone has gotten a chance to select their dessert, their virtual dessert for today, I would just like to point out that next month we have a couple of more webinars. On the 16th, we have the first in our series presented by Bobby Hobgood on how to deliver and lead better web conferencing sessions. That one will be on engaging participants in a web conference. And then we have our regular CTL monthly webinar, and next month a couple of faculty members will be showing us their favorite Canvas tools. So please, if you're interested, go ahead and sign up for those. They're on the calendar. So I want to thank everybody for attending, and remember, I will be sending out a link to this recording by the end of the week. So thanks to everybody.